In 2013, a guy named Jamie Siminoff walks onto ABC's Shark Tank to pitch a product called Doorbot. His ask was a $700,000 investment in exchange for a 10% stake in the company. And his pitch? Well, I'll say it didn't go over too great. Looking back at the video, Jamie seems a bit stiff. His intro's a little gimmicky. He describes Doorbot as caller ID for your front door, then tries to crack some jokes, and ends by throwing some fake money in the air and asking who will be the first to, quote, ring my bell. The sharks ask him some questions about the numbers, which honestly are pretty impressive. You can see the sharks reacting really positively to the numbers. He even had a national retailer lined up, ready to put the product on shelves. In the end though, Jamie Siminoff walked out with nothing, no investment. So what went wrong? Jamie was pitching a really neat piece of technology, the first Wi-Fi enabled smart doorbell that integrated with your smartphone. But in his pitch, he wasn't able to tell a compelling story about Doorbot that connected to a real problem. Compared to a traditional video doorbell that you could get for $50 or an upmarket full-service security system, the sharks just couldn't understand where a $200 Doorbot would sit in the market. Who would actually pay for this thing? Well, turns out, a lot of people. Jamie Siminoff left the Shark Tank with zero interest, but he went back to his office, rebranded Doorbot as a company you may have heard of called Ring. He ended up selling the company to Amazon for $1 billion a few years later. For any of the sharks, that $700,000 investment he was asking for would have turned into $100 million. The easy narrative around this story is that it shows a lack of vision on the part of the sharks. Looking back on it, I mean, come on, Ring seems like a no-brainer. Half the people you know probably have one if you don't have one yourself. But I think what this story actually shows is just how important your pitch really is. You can have an absolute slam dunk product that ticks every box a consumer is looking for. But if you can't tell the right story about it, if you can't present it in a way that shows how all those boxes are actually ticked, well, the customer or potential investor isn't going to get it. So that's what we're looking at this week, the pitch. We're going to break it down, figure out where things go right and where things go wrong, and in the end, my hope is to leave you with some helpful advice on how to craft the perfect sales pitch. Hi, I'm Eric Jansen, an entrepreneur turned sales professor, and I have a simple mission: to change the way that people think about sales. And this is Sales Reframed, a podcast brought to you in partnership with Ivy Executive Education. On this episode, you'll be hearing from the entrepreneur and investor Brendan Kennedy, who was the first person to ever raise institutional funds in the cannabis industry. You'll also hear from Ashley Eman, the founder of Twigs Pretzels, Apricot and founder Chloe Baudouin, and my favorite dragon from Dragon's Den, the founder of 1-800-GOT-JUNK, Brian Scudamore. Dragon's Den, Shark Tank, and other similar shows from around the world have really brought the idea of the pitch out of the boardroom and into our living rooms. And it makes sense. Pitching might be the highest stakes, most intense, all eyes on you moment that you can have in business. It's a perfect spectator sport. So what is the purpose of the pitch? For me, a great pitch does three things: G, P, and S. It grabs attention, it identifies a problem, and it offers a solution. GPS. Let's start with G, grab attention. There are lots of ways that you can open a pitch, but there's one that hits every time.
The best pitches tell a story. There's a value proposition pitch. There's a product solution pitch or a product pitch. There's a problem solution pitch. The best of the best tell a story.
Meet Brendan Kennedy. In 2019, Fortune called him the marijuana billionaire, based on his astronomical success funding, launching, and acquiring businesses in the cannabis space. Brendan got interested in cannabis while he was working for Silicon Valley Bank, SVB, in the mid-2000s. He was part of SVB Analytics, a company that was tasked with coming up with valuations of venture-backed companies.
One valuable asset that I got from that job was each of the companies, the CEO or the founder, someone had to speak to me and tell me what they were doing in order for me to create the value, to value the business, put a price on it. I heard hundreds of pitches from very successful people who had already raised a Series A, a Series B, Series C, and some of them were just weeks or months away from an IPO. So I got to hear other successful people tell me their story and pitch me their company. And that was probably the best training I could have for what I would eventually do.
Around 2010, Brendan started hearing about a few other companies trying to break into the cannabis market. It was a sector that was completely off the radar at SVB. Brendan and two business partners decided to look into cannabis, and after about a year of homework on the industry, they decided they were going to create a private equity firm focused on investing in that area. So in 2011, Kennedy co-founded Privateer Holdings, described as the first private equity firm focused exclusively on legal cannabis. Privateer went on to raise hundreds of millions of dollars and built and invested in some of the industry's earliest breakout brands. But before all that, back in 2010, the idea of investing in cannabis was still a radical one, and they knew that to be taken seriously by investors, they'd have to present themselves a little bit differently.
And it was, we weren't going to do puns. We weren't going to do, cannabis and bikinis and wrappers, and nothing was going to be green and 420 and the leaves all over the place. And, we weren't going to do, we're going to stay away from Cheech and Chong and sort of that whole genre. We wore suits and had short haircuts, and, we paid our taxes, and we were smart.
This kind of differentiation is one way to stand out and grab attention. It also served as a set of guiding principles and guardrails for how the company would operate for years to come.
We used words intentionally. And so for 10 years, I always said cannabis, and I would flip every reporter's question. I'm going to say a bunch of words that I did not say for 10 years, right? A reporter would say, so do you smoke weed? And I'd say, I occasionally consume cannabis. And they would, say something, blah, 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 pot. I would reply cannabis. And I never said marijuana. I never said any of those words. And it was so intentional and so spot on. And it was partially luck and partially guidance from the right people, but it was one of the best choices we ever made.
With that differentiation and strong brand identity as a jumping off point, Brendan and his partners knew that their actual pitch would have to be equally as impressive in order to grab investors' attention.
We put together a deck and set out to raise $7 million from investors in the Series A who were interested in investing in the cannabis industry. As we started pitching, one of the things we were really worried about was reputational risk. Were we throwing away our future careers by jumping into the cannabis industry? And so, while we were pitching investors, we were also spending some time going back to our own personal networks, people within our personal network, to explain to them why we were doing what we were doing so that they wouldn't think we were crazy. And Jim Anderson was my boss. He was the founder of SVB Analytics. I wanted to explain to him what I was doing so that if another investor or someone asked him, he'd at least understand my rationale. He invited me to his house one morning, and I gave him the pitch. I explained to him, what we were going to do, what we intended to do at Privateer Holdings.
So Brendan shows up at his former boss's house with a PowerPoint presentation laying out his vision for the next 10 years of the cannabis industry with data to back it up. So how do you sell that kind of vision? How do you convince someone that a substance that had, for all intents and purposes, been illegal in the US since the 1930s was not only going to become legal, but also profitable? Where do you even start?
One of the first things we did was size the industry, right? And which was a harder project than it sounds like it should be, right? We were trying to understand how much cannabis is consumed in the United States and how much of it is consumed around the world. And I think we did it like 20 different ways. I remember looking at, the DEA was the best source, and the Department of State, the U.S. Department of State. They had this report that they issued. It was about illicit drugs globally, but it listed country by country how much they thought the cannabis market was. And no matter how we did it, we kept coming up with roughly 50 billion in the U.S. and roughly 200 billion globally. So here was this massive market that had no, other than cartels and Hell's Angels, there was no competition. And so it was a massive market. We looked at a lot of polling data, and we were in California at the time. Polling data for cannabis oddly mimicked, parallel to polling data for gay marriage. But it was just 4 or 5 years. I can't remember exactly how many years, 4 or 5 years behind. And so you could see these lines were parallel. and that eventually people were going to think about cannabis the same way they felt about gay marriage, and that public perception was switching on this particular topic.
I think it's important to point out here what Privateer were pitching was a thesis. Most pitch decks are based around proof points like sales to date, number of customers, year over year or month over month growth. Hard numbers that show whatever it is you're pitching actually has traction. The train is on the tracks, it's barreling forward, and you'd be nuts to stay on the platform. Privateer's pitch deck was completely different. It had data, but it was predictive. And they were going to use data to tell a story about the inevitability of how this market was going to go. They weren't selling a product. What they were selling was a vision.
Cannabis is a mainstream product consumed by mainstream people. That's first point. Second point was that the end of prohibition is inevitable, and that brands would shape the future of the industry. And that was our core belief. We were asking people to invest in an idea, invest in a mission and a vision, not a tangible company. And that's a hard sell. And it's a hard sell in cannabis, but we were able to do it. We were able to raise $7 million from a group of investors from really around the world who believed in us and believed in our vision, believed that we could accomplish what we said we were going to do.
Brennan's old boss, Jim Anderson, was one of those original investors in what would become Privateer Holdings, a decision that has yielded an estimated 100x return. Not bad for Jim. With Jim Anderson's endorsement and investment secured, Privateer had the confidence to go out and keep pitching. It wasn't always easy, and they heard no a lot in the early days. But eventually, Privateer found momentum, and it was able to grow into the behemoth that it is today. I asked Brennan about some of those early pitches, and to my surprise, he told me that one of the toughest pitches wasn't even to a potential investor.
The hardest pitch was a guy named Terry Heckler. And Terry Heckler is this famous Seattle marketing branding genius. How good is Terry Heckler? Terry Heckler named Starbucks. Terry designed the first mermaid logo and everything. And so Terry Heckler at Heckler Associates, firm doesn't even exist anymore. And I'm not sure about Terry, but he was old back then. Terry had this famous interview style where he would hire employees. He would walk in to a room and he would sit down, he'd have a piece of paper in front of him, and he'd raise his hands and say nothing. And so that's how he interviewed me. He sat down with a piece of paper and folded his hands and gestured, go for it, and didn't say anything for 30 minutes. I just talked. I talked about how I saw the industry, what I was trying to build. The end, he said, I get it. I need you to come back and pitch to the rest of the team. And they said, what you're trying to do is build a brand to end prohibition. And off the top of his head, he said, there's five ways brands fuel change. They change perceptions of the product and user. They inspire confidence and trust. They reduce barriers to change. They create and imply legitimacy. And then they can directly create change. And he said, that's the brand. That's what you want your brands to do. We can help you do that. But that was the hardest pitch. It's hard to pitch to silence, but it also taught me a lot. It taught me to just keep going and pitching to silence. And that's telling a story. That was a valuable experience.
I said earlier that a great pitch does three things. It grabs attention, it identifies a problem, and it proposes a solution. GPS. And I think Brennan has some incredible advice to pass along about all three. But let's talk about grabbing attention. Here's the thing about grabbing attention. You're not trying to close the deal in the first 30 seconds. When Brennan walked into the room wearing a suit and said cannabis instead of weed, he wasn't expecting investors to immediately write a check. He was just trying to get them to lean in, to stay in the conversation long enough to hear the data, to see the thesis, to understand why this mattered. Brennan's suit said, I'm not who you think I am. His data said, this market is bigger than you realize. His intentional language said, this is legitimate. And together, those things created one simple reaction. All right, tell me more. That's grabbing attention. You earn the right to keep talking. You buy yourself enough credibility and elicit curiosity so that they want to hear what comes next. Now on to the next phase. What problem are you actually solving? This is the moment where you capture that one thing that's making everyone's life just a little more difficult than it needs to be. That nagging thorn in everyone's side. And you articulate it clearly, concisely, and in language that resonates with your audience. Subproblems are big, dramatic, hugely obvious things. But other problems are smaller and less scary. They feel less like a ticking time bomb than they do like an insight. The kind of thing that makes you go, huh, never thought about that before. The problem our next guest identified is definitely one of those softer, more insightful types. And her solution just happened to be delicious.
Walking into the Dragon's Den, a little intimidating, but less than expected. It felt more of a conversation than anything, rather than being grilled.
That's Ashley Eamon talking about her experience on Dragon's Den back in 2022, where she walked away with an offer for $1 million deal. Ashley and her two brothers are the co-founders of Twigs Craft Pretzels, a delicious snack that, if you're listening to this in Canada at least, probably seen in your local grocery store or maybe on an Air Canada flight. Back in 2018, one of Ashley's brothers lived in the US, and he noticed that seasoned pretzels were starting to take off as a snacking alternative to chips. Ashley and her family loved salty snacks, and nothing like this existed in Canada. They figured if their family wanted better, more flavorful options, then other families would too. So, they started on some research and development. And luckily, they had a secret weapon on their team.
My mom, we're Ukrainian. She loves to cook, loves to bake. She was like, I need to try and recreate something along these lines.
That is awesome. I love it. Good old family business.
Yeah, all the way up to the mother.
After some delicious A/B testing over various recipes and flavor combos, they came up with a signature flavor and figured they might be onto a product they could actually sell. They produced a trial run for local retailers in Calgary, Alberta, and started knocking on doors. Ashley literally packed up her car and went door to door, cold calling local convenience stores and grocers. And in only a few short months, she sold through 7,000 bags. Suffice it to say, she had to learn how to pitch really quickly.
I used to be a teacher, so I don't have a ton of sales background. So it was definitely looking in the mirror, practicing your pitch, all those little things right before we head out. And then, yeah, it was a learning experience. Because we didn't have a lot of food and bev background, when we initially went to stores, we had larger case sizes than they typically would accept. But I think going in with confidence is a huge piece. Understanding your product is a huge piece, at least that was for us. And knowing that the retailer itself would enjoy your flavor was a huge piece for us. So I think that provided us a little bit of confidence going into the stores initially.
You've got this homemade recipe. You've done your initial run of, you said 7,000 was the initial run? That's a lot still. That's a significant investment. You've got to do packaging and you've mass produced it. And are you literally like walking in with a case, like walking into a convenience store? Like where are you going to cold call these people?
We went to the outskirts of Calgary, and I think it was Philo and Langdon and Sobeys Okotoks. We had boxes in the back of our car, literally walked in, didn't bring the boxes with us initially, but had our sales pitch pamphlet, but our sales pitch with us. And yeah, just sold on the spot there and then delivered the boxes to the back of the grocery store. And that was that. And just couldn't even believe our first store. I think we went 3 for 3 that day. So it was a wild first day.
I think Ashley is underselling herself a little bit. It wasn't just confidence and good luck that let her go 3 for 3 on her first day of cold calls. She went into those meetings prepared. And when it comes to pitching, there's research that shows that being prepared beats out sheer enthusiasm. In 2009, a team of researchers analyzed a few thousand pitches in various pitch competitions. They came up with a way to measure both passion and persuasion, and they collected data through observations and experiments to see which of the two was more likely to be the deciding factor when judges were presented with a pitch. The clear winner? Preparedness. The more you can do your homework and anticipate the potential questions and pushback, the better off you'll be. Ashley was prepared when she went out to sell those initial orders, and she was equally prepared when it came time to appear on Dragon's Den not long after.
I think we sometimes make the mistake of you see somebody who delivers an incredible pitch that looks casual. You didn't look rehearsed when you watched the clip. But to know that there were, is it an exaggeration to say hundreds of hours of prep that went into getting ready for that?
Lots of prep in advance for sure. When you first apply for Dragon's Den, you actually have to send in a video. I think it's a 60-second video pitching your product. So that was my role. And so I kind of put together a 60-second pitch of Twigs, how we were doing overall with revenue, what locations we were in, and why we were unique and why one of the dragons would want to invest in our company. So we initially created that video, and then a few months later, get a call back and you go for kind of a virtual interview. You have to be confident, pitch your product, and if you get the thumbs up, then you move forward to a second round of interviews. We made it through that. And once you get the thumbs up after that, then you get approved for actually being on the show. And so, yeah, we obviously made it through all 3 rounds. And then it came to actually creating our pitch for the dragons. We knew at that point we had doubled year over year in sales. And so, yeah, we were at a really good spot and we knew we were going to continue growing. And a huge piece, we knew Arlene was going to be there. And we know that she loves Canadian food products. She has a bunch of experience with food products and loves kind of that family aspect as well. So when we created our pitch, we knew all 3 of us wanted to be there as well as her mom, just because we wanted to, emphasize that we still are a family owned and operated business. And she still to this day creates the recipes. After due diligence, after the show, we didn't end up going through with the deal with Arlene. It was a wild ride.
After their success on Dragon's Den, Ashley and her family were ready to take Twigs to a bigger stage. And with that ambition came even higher stakes pitches.
So when we initially launched, we put together just a list of goals of retailers that we wanted to get into, sales targets, revenue targets that we wanted to hit, profitability target, all those little targets that we wanted to hit. And one of those retailer targets that we wanted to hit was becoming an airline partner, specifically with Air Canada, because obviously we're a Canadian company and we really promote that because we're really proud of that. That was one of our goals back in 2019 when we initially launched. And like I said earlier, we were thinking this was probably 10 plus years down the road. We were not thinking this was going to be within the first 5 years, but the opportunity came.
The problem that Air Canada needed to solve was pretty straightforward. Travelers needed options for in-flight snacks, and Air Canada's pretzel vendor wasn't cutting it. Ashley and her team looked at the airline's needs and started to think about how they could position themselves as an ideal vendor. They couldn't just go in saying, Air Canada needs snacks and we sell snacks. They needed to shine a light on the problem or opportunity that Air Canada didn't even know they had. They needed snacks that were Canadian, high quality, cost effective, and that passengers would not only want to eat, but actually look forward to as part of their in-flight experience.
We knew that they were looking for a new pretzel provider. And so we, as a long shot, obviously put together our pitch and created like a full slide deck of where we had been, where we started, really highlighted the Canadian piece, the family piece, and just, the growth that we had in the first 5 years. We sent product because we knew we're really confident with our product, right? We knew that if they had tried these pretzels versus what they were currently providing on airlines, that they would love them. The rest is history once they tried it. Kind of the product spoke for itself, we'll just say that.
Ashley's pitch to Air Canada identified the problem in such a way that the solution was obvious. Twigs checked all the boxes. It was Canadian, family-owned, tasted amazing, and had proven traction in the market. I said before that sometimes identifying a problem can feel more like a moment of insight. For Ashley and her brothers, the insightful moment was recognizing an opportunity in the market. The problem they identified was a lack of a compelling pretzel option in the grocery aisle. They walked into the Dragon's Den with confidence born out of competence. They knew the product, they knew the customer, and they'd done the work of going door to door to actually sell it. They had hard numbers to back up their confidence, and momentum was on their side. The preparation they had done beforehand wasn't just about getting themselves ready by nailing their talking points. They were also personalizing the pitch to the individual dragons. So when it came time for the final part of my GPS framework, they had everything lined up to be successful and land the deal. And that brings us to the final part of the framework. S. Offer a solution. We're headed back to the Dragon's Den, and not only are we going to hear about a successful pitch, we're going to hear about it from both sides of the stage.
Because of Apricot, parents can finally find a bra that their daughter will actually wear.
They fit her from when she's flat chested to fully developed, so moms don't have to keep buying new bras as her daughter develops.
That's Chloe Baudouin and Jessica Mao pitching Apricot on CBC's Dragon's Den. It's a company dedicated to helping the 90% of girls who feel embarrassed to shop for and wear their first bra. Apricot design bras that grow as girls grow, so they can fit into the same bra when they develop from an A to a D cup. They've been featured in 17 Magazine, BuzzFeed, NBC, CTV, and Fashion. And Apricotton is now the top Google search result for teen bra. The founders are also both graduates of Western. One of the dragons listening to the pitch was Brian Scudamore. He's the founder of the multi-million-dollar franchise we now know as 1-800-GOT-JUNK. Brian got his start way back in 1989 with a pickup truck and $700. He's gone on to start other successful companies like Wow One Day Painting and Shack Shine, all under the O2E Brands umbrella, which also happens to be consistently ranked as one of the best companies to work for in Canada. He made his debut as a dragon on CBC's Dragon's Den in 2024, and in season 19, he heard the Apricotton pitch and invested. I was lucky enough to facilitate a reunion between Brian and Chloe, and of course, there was one question that was top of mind for me.
So, what was it about the company, the team, the pitch that stood out for you with Apricotton?
There's a few things. So Chloe comes out, Jessica comes out. There was this confidence. There was this belief in what you were creating together, you and Jessica, and what you were selling and pitching, not just to us, but on national TV to get people to know the brand. And I was impressed that you both finished at Western because I didn't finish university. So you're one step ahead of me, but you finished and then you actually made some decisions to leave your day jobs to go all in. And that was a big one for me. I remember that on the show, it came up so many times where Wes or anyone would push and say, how come you're not all in? Oh, I can't afford to be. Well, I think our belief as entrepreneurs was you can't afford not to be. I was impressed by their marketing, their TikTok numbers, their social media influence. First and foremost, the way they were telling stories. The first bra that grows when you grow, and what they had to share about the impact it had on teens, on getting rid of the fear of buying bras, on so many different things, on just seeing that there was an opportunity here that others didn't know how to tell a story around. They found an opportunity and ran with it.
Chloe, from your perspective on the prep for it, did you know who the dragons were going to be that season? How did you prep for it? How did you think about what to hit on depending on who you were pitching to?
Yeah, so we did know that Brian had been cast on Dragon's Den, and I feel like we did practice more of like the business side of things, like memorizing all of our numbers. We were watching other people's pitches and seeing like what did they do well versus what did they get grilled on so that we could fix that. So I would say we were a lot more focused on the Q&A side of things and just nailing the pitch versus, tailoring it to each dragon. However, I will say something that we did to calm our nerves is we actually watched everyone's Instagrams to remind us that all of you are just normal people and that it doesn't have to be this huge scary thing. But we still weren't 100% sure of your stories or what exactly you were looking for in a company. And so for us, we just wanted to be as honest as possible of what Apricotton is, the problem we're solving, what our numbers are.
That passion and authentic storytelling really resonated with Brian, probably as much as the product itself. They were able to grab Brian's attention in the pitch by being confident, meticulously prepared, and all in on their idea. They articulated a real problem, that 90% of girls are embarrassed and intimidated by shopping for bras. And those negative experiences can lead to real harm to their self-esteem and willingness to participate in things like gym class and after-school sports. Their solution was simple, elegant, and differentiated. Apricotton, a bra that grows with the person who wears it, which is a win in terms of fit and a win in terms of value since they don't need to be replaced as often. As a dragon on the show, Brian's heard a lot of pitches, but when it came to Apricotton, all of this, the G, the P, and the S, the whole thing really resonated with him.
You've seen lots now, presumably through Dragon's Den and even probably private investments and other pitches that you get contacted about. What is it that makes the good ones stand out from the bad ones? Or opposite, what are the horrible ones doing that people should be avoiding?
So I'm a new investor. I've run my business for 35 years and never invested in anyone else until Dragon's Den. And I did 3 deals that were completed out of 8 that happened on TV. And I remember at the very beginning of the season, every moment when we're off camera, I would turn to Wes and Arlene and Manjeet and Michelle and ask them questions. What makes a successful investment? What are you looking for? How do you validate in just an hour of getting to know two potential entrepreneurs whether or not they're worth investing in? So I had a real fire hose introduction to investing and had to get clear on what I was looking for. And Arlene said to me, "What's going to be important to you? How will you know what you're looking for?" And I said, "It's all about people, finding people who believe in a vision and will do anything to ensure nothing gets in their way until they're successful, that they're willing to make mistakes, that they're willing to learn, and they're not the smartest people in the room." And that became my criteria. And as I was sort of let loose with, here's the deals, see what you can make of them, I stuck to that and kept that forefront in my mind.
I live vicariously through my students now. So it was really so proud of you and so rewarding to see you go from in that classroom shy to national televised pitch. So what changed? Like, how did you prepare for, become comfortable with? How did you evolve and change over time to be the Chloe that I saw pitching Brian and team on Dragon's Den?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's funny because I honestly, I have changed quite a lot. I'm not as shy anymore, but I remember the first major pitch I did was, I think, in 2021. I was in Montreal and Jessica couldn't make it. Jessica's a lot more of a driver. She's a lot more outgoing than I am, and she wasn't there. She couldn't make it, and so I had to be the one to go network and try and meet with investors, and that absolutely horrified me. The other thing that was going on was there was a pitch competition for an $100,000 investment, and I was like, "You know what? I'm not doing any networking, I'm too scared to do this. I'm just gonna go on stage and do the $100,000 thing." And so I think I was, like, one of the first 5 to pitch because in my head, I was like, "If I'm one of the first people to pitch, then I have a higher chance of getting it just because, like, I'll be more memorable this way." Just my thought process around it, and it was just a 1-minute pitch. I ended up making it to the finals. I had to pitch, like, 6 more times on stage. I also had to do 2 full hours of Q&A, which was horrifying to me. But by doing all of that and being forced to be in front of a crowd of hundreds of people really taught me the importance of, 1, putting myself out there, but 2, it made me realize I'm a lot better of a pitcher than I think. The fact that I started with just this 1-minute impromptu pitch, and then it led me to the finals, and I was able to do the Q&A and everything. I wouldn't have been able to get there if I didn't have a good idea or if I wasn't able to communicate that idea properly. From there on, I just started applying for every pitch competition possible and just constantly improving that pitch. I am still kind of that reserved shy girl, but I know how to, turn on the confidence when I need to as well.
There are two versions, it seems like, of Chloe, right? There's the version of Chloe that is, and maybe it's your more natural tendency to be a little more subdued, soft spoken. And then there's a Chloe that I see take the stage and own the room and speak confidently and answer questions confidently. And I think we all have two different versions of ourselves. How do you get that Chloe to show up? Do you have a routine, a question, a power playlist? Like, what do you do to get that version of Chloe to show up to the pitches?
Yeah, that's a great question because I genuinely don't. I know a lot of people will, talk themselves up or play music and things like that. I don't. In my head, I'm just like, I need to do this, and therefore I will. Even not just for pitching, but even we've done a few pop-up shops, and even that sometimes is really scary to talk to a customer and try and sell them on a bra and try and not to be too salesy, but also try to get all the features out.
You said be confident. What does that mean to you? What attributes make you confident?
The main thing is using my voice. I think I very often when I was younger, I was told I was very soft spoken and that it was hard to hear me. And I think that's one of the main things, especially at Ivy, that we learned that it's like, you need to command a room. And so for me, I want to command that room. I want everyone to be listening to what I have to say. And so I feel like honestly, the biggest thing for me personally that showcases my confidence and that makes me feel confidence is when I'm able to command a room where I can speak loudly, I can make people laugh with my pitch, or I can make people smile, or I can make people frown when I want to. And I think having that sense of power when I'm doing a pitch really helps raise my confidence. And then it just makes it's almost like a snowball effect where it makes everything feel easier after that too.
Chloe's talking about pitching with joy, and joy is something that has a measurable impact on how your pitch is received. In 2019, researchers analyzed almost 1,500 pitch videos and over 8 million video frames, and found that pitching with joy leads to better outcomes, especially when that joy is displayed during the beginning and ending phases of a pitch. The paper offers a word of caution, though. Prolonged peak joy may trigger negative inferences like overconfidence or blindness to flaws. So displaying joy during a pitch matters. Just don't overdo it. All right, back to Chloe and Brian.
Sometimes I think that one of the most important pitches that we can make is the pitch that we tell ourselves or the pitch that we give ourselves. And I thought there was a moment that I picked out of another interview where you were, I believe, at your family cottage on the dock trying to reimagine what the business could be like. And that, to me, I guess when you're a hammer, everything's a nail. But I viewed it as like, oh, this is interesting. This is like Brian almost like selling himself on why it's worth investing more time and resources and energy and why I want to double down on this idea. So what was that moment like? Was it like you needed to sell yourself on why this was worth doing still, or was it just a reimagination of the business?
8 years in the business, I was questioning myself. High school and university dropout. I joined the entrepreneurs organization where you had to have 1 million in revenue to get in. I started to learn from that group. That was my education, if you will. But I was surrounded by people who had $10 million businesses, $100 million businesses, and very sexy, glamorous businesses. And I'm in junk removal questioning my future. I was in this doom loop and starting down a bit of a spiral to think, not only do I not have what it takes, but maybe the business doesn't have what it takes. So I retreated to my parents' little shack on the water that they had near Vancouver. And I took out a sheet of paper, 1 page double-sided, and I said, I am going to imagine for a moment pure possibility if nothing was in my way. And I pitched myself. I read that painted picture, that vision that said we'd be on the Oprah Winfrey Show, we'd be the FedEx of junk removal, we'd be in the top 30 cities in North America because we were already in Vancouver and that's the 30th ranked metro. And when I looked at this painted picture vision of 5 years out with a very specific date of December 31st, 2003 on it, I started to see the future. I got chills and I was bought in. I was all in with what I saw. And so it's interesting. I hadn't thought of a pitch this way before, but a pitch is not in front of investors. It's also to your parents. It's also to your wife, your husband, your boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever it is. It's to yourself. And it's incredibly important to remember that everything starts with yourself. If I don't have the right mindset, the business ain't going anywhere. When I tried out for Dragon's Den, it took me 3 times before I was finally successful. Most people would give up after 2 times. Most people wouldn't fly to Toronto from Vancouver and spend a day auditioning and wait months to hear a yes or a no. It takes hard work, it takes tenacity, but it's learning from every single no you ever get in your life, in every potential pitch, whatever it might look like, to say, how do I ultimately one day, if I'm ready or when I'm ready, get to a yes?
Do I hear this right? Brian Scudamore, the CEO and founder of 1-800-GOT-JUNK, got rejected from Dragon's Den, not once, but twice?
You got it. And I honestly thought it was going to be the 3rd time because when you audition, they put you on a panel, and I've signed away my life. I'm not allowed to mention who was on that panel beside me, pretending to do pitches. But I mean, if I was CBC, I would have chosen someone else. Like there was some serious talent there, but they liked me and I fit what they were looking for at the time. But you leave a pitch like that and you literally wait months going, I wonder if I'm going to get it. And you question yourself and you fill yourself with doubt. But would I have auditioned a 4th time? Perhaps, because I believed in the cause and what I wanted to be a part of.
If you're open to it, Chloe, any advice to those young entrepreneurs who may be sitting on that idea that are afraid to bring it up in public or dreaming about being on Dragon's Den one day? Any advice to them?
No matter what, it's just important to put yourself out there. It's the only way that you can get opportunities. And I think even if you lose, even if you don't do well, it's not great, it doesn't mean that it won't get better. It doesn't mean that people won't want to hear you again. There's been so many times where we've pitched to investors where they've said no to us, and then they've been like a judge at a pitch competition and they've picked us. And so all of these different situations, as scary as they are, will help you just continuously improve and will just open you up to new opportunities that will get you going in the right direction.
If you want to talk about a successful pitch, one that makes a solution so obvious that you'd have to be nuts to turn it down, I don't think you have to look much further than 2 young women making their bra company seem like a no-brainer to a guy who made his fortune hauling junk. Brian said it himself. He was probably the last person you'd expect to invest in Apricotton, but that's exactly what he did. Chloe grabbed his attention, identified a problem, and demonstrated joyfully that her company was the best possible solution. GPS. This time around, we've been trying to answer a really straightforward question. What makes a pitch successful? For your next pitch, remember GPS. G. Grab attention and get your audience to lean in. The most effective way to do that is with a story. P. Explain the problem that you solve and why it matters. And finally, S. Articulate your solution with energy and enthusiasm. Oh, and one last thing. Remember Jamie Siminoff's Doorbot pitch on Shark Tank? He's a great reminder that one bad pitch doesn't mean it's all over. A botched pitch is an opportunity to learn, refine, and improve. And who knows? That next one might be worth $1 billion. Next time on Sales Reframed, closing. In the next episode, we're taking a look at what it takes to close a deal. And we've got great help from folks like Jake Carls, co-founder of Midday Squares. He's a genius when it comes to getting people excited about his product. And he'll be joining us to talk about how he's been able to close deals with the biggest retailers on the planet. And how to reframe the no.
No doesn't mean it's over. A no is, how do you now come back at a different angle? How do you come back at a new conversation? How do we de-risk it more? How can you get creative? And I think that applies to everything, whether it's a big retailer, small retailer, an investor, a media, a journalist that you want to speak to. It's how do you come at it differently that will now connect to them?
This has been an episode of Sales Reframed, and I'm your host, Eric Jansen. A huge thanks to my guests this week, Brendan Kennedy, Ashley Eman, Brian Scudamore, and Chloe Baudouin. Check out the show notes for links to more info about all their incredible projects. This podcast is brought to you in partnership with Ivey Executive Education. Part of the Ivey Business School, consistently ranked among the top business schools globally, Ivey Executive Education delivers high-impact learning experiences for organizations and leaders at all levels. From custom design programs to coaching and open enrollment courses, Ivey works with executives and business operators around the world to drive real results. Their mission, like ours, is to turn cutting-edge research into practical insights that help people learn, grow, and succeed in a changing world. This show takes a village. I'd like to thank our executive producer, Sean Ackland Grant, and our editorial advisor, James Greenhill. Our audio engineer and producer is Carol Eugene Park, and our narrative producer is Michael Catano. Thanks also to our creative directors, Christina Ball and Michelle Stanescu. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.